All right, we'll go live. Welcome everyone to our first water quality goal team implementation, water quality goal implementation team Submersion Series webinar. Our topic today, reviewing our accounting framework. How can we promote investment in outcome-based management? One second, sorry, still a couple technical bugs. This is our first one of these, so we'll have a couple of those, apologies. So at this point, you should be hearing me. If I can get reactions or thumbs up from folks, that will make me feel better as I start talking to the void. Just note, we will have both a chat box and a Q&A function as well throughout the webinar. You're encouraged to enter questions into the Q&A, especially that will help us track and respond to things as we go. Please remember to keep yourself muted after you join. We will try to engage in discussion later, but for now, we want to avoid disruptions because again, we are recording this webinar. And those of you who are familiar with the reactions feature, if you want to keep things lighthearted and positive, we encourage use of those throughout as well. All right, so why are we here? What are we doing? So this is not your average water quality goal team meeting. That should be clear. You had to register for this one. So the stated purpose of the water quality goal implementation team, or WQGIT, is to evaluate, focus, and accelerate the implementation of practices, policies, programs that will restore water quality in the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries to conditions that support living resources and protect human health. Sounds great. And like many other Bay program groups, we meet monthly or frequently to discuss that business. But during our last cycle of our adaptive management review, the water quality goal team leadership and our members acknowledge that we continue to struggle with a balance in our often packed agendas, typically dominated by time-sensitive issues, most often modeling our decisional items. So the leadership wanted to find ways to bring more balance to our priority issues that we otherwise struggle to find time for in-depth discussions. And so that idea became what we're calling the Submersion Series. So this is a new quarterly discussion series. Our intention here is to host exploratory and collaborative conversations that challenge us to confront emerging scientific or social lessons with management opportunities. And these webinars are designed for contribution, not consumption. So each session will strive to include a diverse range of experts and professionals and have honest conversations around critical topics identified by the water quality goal team. And so I also challenge everyone to view these conversations, though recorded, as an opportunity to share and contribute your thoughts and ideas. And so I'll say now, as we get started, that the thoughts or questions expressed in this shared space today are our own and not necessarily reflective of the views of our organizations or the water quality goal team and its leadership or the Bay program. The point of this series is to foster connection both within the water quality goal team and across the partnership, and to improve our collective ability to innovate in the face of our biggest challenges or opportunities. And so as a reflection of that intent, the speakers will spend about half of our time providing remarks, and hopefully we'll have a full 45 minutes or so for discussion, which will also leverage the survey many of you did beforehand. And this is our first session and we have great attendance. So I also want to just thank everyone for showing up. Whatever your affiliation might be, or regardless of where you live or work, you are online with us because you're invested in the Chesapeake Bay or environmental restoration more broadly. We all care, that's why we're here. And we all support a shared vision like the one from the Bay Agreement. So Chesapeake Bay Program partners envision an environmentally and economically sustainable Chesapeake Bay watershed with clean water, abundant life, conserved land, and access to the water, a vibrant cultural heritage, and a diversity of engaged stakeholders. That covers a lot of ground. We won't necessarily cover as much ground in today's discussion, but want to acknowledge that we're all here because we share some part or all of that vision. And with that, I want to briefly acknowledge the team that helped bring this first webinar together. What really does take a village. But I also just want to quickly move on and into the heart of today's discussion. So I will first give a delayed introduction of myself. Jeremy Hanson, I'm a coordinator for the Water Quality Goal Implementation Team, and I'm with the Chesapeake Research Consortium. So I'm just acting as host today, and I will turn it over to Joe Wood, Kurt Stephenson, and Zach Easton to introduce themselves and get things started. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, for all your help getting this started, and thanks everybody for signing on today. So we're obviously at a really important point in bay restoration. You know, we've made significant strides, obviously on wastewater, but other places as well. You know, we're starting to see robust investment in non-point source reductions across the watershed. And I think it shows a real commitment to the resource, a commitment to this issue. But still, non-point reductions have clearly not happened at the rate that we had planned. And Kurt and Zach and others have been contemplating this for quite some time. Many of us probably have, as a part of CSER, but even before that, the recent CSER report that came out of STAC. And one key takeaway that they've made that's rang true to me is that money, getting more money is not our only problem. And maybe it's not even our biggest problem. And they even suggested that our non-point source efforts haven't produced the results that we're hoped for. And today that's really the focus of the conversation. And I want to start off by being really clear that, like, today's effort, I don't think the spirit of any of this is about blaming partners, states or soil and water districts or whoever it is that's kind of doing this for lack of progress. And I hope that becomes really clear by the time we finish here today. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We really want today to explore this idea that the framework, the incentive structures, some of the policies that we have set up as part of this partnership, policies that we've made with the intent of accelerating nutrient reductions, may actually be limiting our ability to do some of this work. They may be limiting our effectiveness. And we really want to dive into that idea and, you know, see where there's agreement, where there's not agreement, and have a conversation centered around this. One of the things I'm always amazed about with the Bay Partnership is how rich we are in talent, in people. And you can see that from the 81 participants here. You know, we have just such a tremendous amount of diverse expertise, you know, economists, biogeochemists, agricultural experts. Like, it's really astounding. Like, I don't go to any Bay program meeting and don't think, like, man, there's a lot of people here I could learn from. And, you know, it's incredible. We have a great brain trust on this issue, but frankly, too often I feel like the dialogue gets reduced down to, you know, this question about what is or what is not going to get credited in the model. And there's winners and losers, and nobody wants to be a loser. And frankly, I think that the dialogue gets zapped. You know, we lose this ability to talk about kind of real issues, and that we could benefit from more focus on what's actually happening rather than what we're getting, you know, rewarded for, what the evaluation is. So, you know, we originally started today's webinar to focus on the idea of establishing non-point source programs that pay for real world outcomes, you know, a pay for performance program that the Bay program could facilitate throughout the watershed. And we still want to do that. Ultimately, that is a goal. You know, we want to brainstorm something new with regard to crediting, something that can allow us to move forward to something more like real performance evaluation and paying for real performance and real outcomes. But we felt like, you know, first we needed to have this open conversation about why we think it's so important to move there, why that is so badly needed at this time. And so that's really what the conversation is today. We want to get to that other conversation that I think is an interesting, it's a difficult conversation, like how can we do that? But today is about why. And so we hope this conversation today can be helpful to some of the efforts that are going on to imagine the next chapter in Bay restoration. You know, what the Beyond 2025 group might contemplate that we move towards. So, you know, I want to also mention that I really appreciate the amount of effort that's gone into our current framework. You know, we have done just a tremendous amount of work as a partnership to put together what we have. But I also think we're at this point right now, you know, leading up to 2025, where we really need to have this honest look at what's not working and allow ourselves some time to imagine, what could we move towards? What could we do different? We certainly don't always have to do things the way we've done them, although it can be challenging to kind of break out of that box. Personally, my own view is that our BMP framework has really relied heavily on these BMP expert panels to determine what is and what isn't effective. And that's not a criticism of those panels. There's been some really great work that's happened there. But frankly, I think that non-point source, reductions, the work to manage nutrients across our watershed, across states, across thousands and thousands of farmers is far too complex to ask a single report to dictate that. And that we need the local decision makers, the people that are on the farm, the TA staff that is on the farm and can see things, to be able to be key players in optimization of the effort. We need feedback loops where they can see what's working and what's not and act accordingly. And I'm not saying that people don't do that already. Certainly there are efforts to do that, but I'm not sure that our incentive structure that we've established encourages them to do that. So with that, I'm going to kick it to Kurt and Zach, and they're going to walk through a presentation explaining, in more detail some of these issues. And then after that, we are going to have a discussion period. I'm going to show a bunch of the survey results that came from that survey, and we're going to just kind of open it up to a lot of discussion, facilitated discussion. If you have questions about Zach and Kurt's presentation, about what they're showing, what does this mean, drop it in the chat and we'll try to respond to that. But for the responses, or if you disagree with something you hear, we definitely want to hear that, but that'll come after their presentation. So Kurt, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Joe Wood. I'm with Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I'm a scientist. I mainly work in Virginia. I'm also on the Water Quality GIT. So that's who I am. So I'll kick it to you, Kurt and Zach now. Take it away.
Thanks, Joe. Just by way of introduction, I'm with the Department of Ag and Applied Economics at Virginia Tech. Zach is, you want to introduce yourself, Zach?
Sure, Zach Easton, Biological System Engineering at Virginia Tech. Both Kurt and I are recently retired from STAC as well, so.
Yeah, I don't know if we were retired or we drummed out of the club, but we were part of the writing team for the Caesar report. And so I guess what Zach and I's job today was to sort of motivate the discussion, stir the pot, if you will. But we want to go through a couple of things. We want to just sort of summarize what do we here today for, and what do we mean by the TMDL accounting and crediting framework. We wanted to talk a little bit and motivate that discussion about what are the outcomes that we're seeing, particularly non-point source response. And then lastly, then take the last part of the presentation to relate those responses and what we're seeing on sort of the non-point source we're seeing on the ground, and relate them to this discussion about opportunities for improving or changing or adapting the framework to those to get different outcomes. So so next slide, Zach. Zach's driving, and I'll talk for a little bit, and then Zach will take over. So conceptually, this is what we're talking about. Conceptually, what we're talking about today is, look, we've set up the Chesapeake Bay program. The states have set up a set of programs, a set of policy rules that govern how incentive programs are structured, how they're implemented, what types of requirements are implemented. But behind that is a whole set of accounting rules, the TMDL accounting rules, that sort of structure sort of program implementation and what program managers do. And that's the TMDL accounting framework. And that's what we're focused on. And those set of rules and those set of programs are intended to change people's behavior. And hopefully that behavioral change will produce non-point source load outcomes, reduced nutrient sediment loads to the Chesapeake Bay. Next slide, just to clarify what we mean by this TMDL accounting framework. This is a very simplified diagram. I hope Gary doesn't go out of his skull, but just to sort of summarize what we're talking about when we're talking about the framework, is that to to claim reductions towards a TMDL, this is kind of what we're talking about. We have an accounting system that estimates average nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment loads over different land uses over a fairly large geographical space, the land river segments. These are generated by CAST. CAST uses nutrient input sources from, aggregate sort of fertilizer sales data, animal numbers, and atmospheric deposition from different models and data sources. That loading area estimate then can be adjusted because when you apply BMPs. And so BMPs, as Joe mentioned before, are the removal efficiency are often expressed as removal efficiency. I know there's different types of BMPs. For the sake of argument, we're just talking about sort of efficiency types of BMPs. That average removal efficiency that goes into the models generated by expert panels. The states, through the WIP planning process, identify BMPs that are going to be applied to that land to get reductions. And we count those reductions through the CAST model. And, then that's our accountability framework that says, okay, are the states, localities doing what they said they were going to do in terms of the planning process? And you multiply it by the number of acres and you get an estimated sort of modeled load reduction. And this is the kind of the way we count and track credit towards trying to achieve that aggregate nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, TMDL load limit. So next slide. So that's what we're talking about here. So the question we ask, I won't go through any of the survey questions except for this one. And then because I think this is particularly relevant, we asked folks leading up to this meeting, the way that the Chesapeake Bay program credits TMDL reduction strongly influences the way programs are implemented. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? Vast majority of people, respondents, it was over 30, I think, agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. So going back to that original flow diagram, look, folks on this call apparently buy in to this fact that if you change the rules, you're going to get different behavior and different things. So what we're going to talk about is that. So I'm going to turn it over now to Zach, and he's going to talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of what we're seeing in terms of the non-point source challenge, and then we're going to start relating those back to this framework.
Sure, great, thanks, Kurt. That was an excellent setup. So what I'd like to talk about is the non-point source challenge, which Kurt just stated. So dealing with those distributed non-point source loads across the landscape generated in different locations at different rates by different managers, and trying to deal with those loads in the watershed. But to set that up, so Kurt described the accounting framework. So what has that resulted in so far in the TMDL? This is a comparison from a paper a couple of years ago, looking at the estimated flow normalized total nitrogen and total phosphorus fluxes to the Chesapeake Bay for both CAST up top here, TN on the left, TP on the right, and then Sparrow, TN on the left and TP on the right. And one thing you can see here is that both models generally agree that the total nitrogen load has been trending down over the past 30 or so years, relatively consistently. The fractionation among source segments might differ a little bit, but generally TN, the models agree, is going down. If you look at TP, however, total phosphorus, we start to see a divergence between these models. CAST estimates, similar to nitrogen, a pretty steady decline over the past 30 years, 20 or 30 years in total phosphorus loads. Whereas Sparrow, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Sparrow, Sparrow is an empirical model, data-driven model from the rim stations. It estimates that total phosphorus loads have actually been increasing. And you can look in here and see about which source sectors might be the dominant players in that increase. It generally looks like it's largely agriculture, so cropland, pasture, etc. And so this is really the challenge. How do we reconcile these differences? And so what we did as part of this STAC Caesar report, comprehensive evaluation of system response, was try to dig in and hypothesize what might be causing these divergences. And we came up with a whole bunch of different possible explanations for why this might be. And what I'll do right now is talk about a couple of those that we think are the most pertinent. I guess I actually have a little bit more setup too. So this is aggregate, delivered to the bay loads. You can also look at individual basins, I guess you'd call it in this case. So This is showing total phosphorus loads for the chop tank on the left and then the Rappahannock on the right. And here you can really see the divergence. You can really see the divergence between what CAS, the accounting framework, estimates the total phosphorus loads in pounds per year being versus what WRTDS, so the, again, an empirical data-driven estimate of total phosphorus loads in these two basins are pretty significantly different. More than double in the chop tank and almost double in the Rappahannock and pretty rapidly increasing in some cases. So part of the question we want to answer is, why was this occurring? And you don't just see it in, these two watersheds. If you look at across all the major rim stations here, you don't really see any improvement. Again, this is now 30 years of data for total phosphorus. You see some improvement in some of these rivers that have major point sources. So the James River, the Patuxent, you do see some pretty dramatic decreases in total phosphorus. Again, those tend to relate to, why can't I think of the word? Wastewater treatment plant upgrades and installations. And since those have been installed, we really see sort of stagnant or level, and in some cases increasing, chop tank in particular, increasing phosphorus loads. And this is despite all of the BMPs that we've stacked on these landscapes. And so one of the premises of CSER was that the achievement of these I was trying to get rid of the floating meeting controls. So achievement of the remaining TMDL goals rests primarily with these non-point sources. So agriculture and urban runoff, although if you look in literature, the vast majority of the load is attributed to the agricultural source sectors. And so this creates challenges to try to scale adoption to reach sufficient reductions. So what might be causing this divergence between observations and model estimates of nutrient and sediment loading? So we asked a couple different questions as part of the report, and these ended up in your survey as well, whoever took the survey. We wanted to know, to what extent does the TMDL counting and crediting create barriers or obstacles to improving water quality outcomes? Well, we thought there were probably a couple barriers that might be sort of embedded in the accounting framework. And the first one, or one of the major ones we identified, was what we call targeting, right? So there's plenty of studies out there that suggest anywhere between 5 and 20% of the land area, and this is sort of nationally, this isn't just in the Chesapeake Bay, although it applies to the Chesapeake Bay as well. 5 to 20% of the land area generates somewhere between 50 to 90% or more of runoff and non-point source loads. There's also huge variability within fields, right? So within field nutrient losses can be confined to relatively small areas that, if we can identify, we could perhaps more easily treat and gain effectiveness relatively inexpensively. Now, again, there's been other studies that have shown targeting BMPs to these localized sites with higher pollution potential can actually improve the cost effectiveness of pollution reduction efforts as well. So one of the sort of thrusts of CSER was to start to dig into, what targeting could perhaps provide the Bay program and what perhaps that could look like. We don't end up proposing, a mechanism to target, these critical pollution source areas, but it was certainly something that we spent a lot of time thinking on as we went through the analysis. And the figures on the right just show some different scales that targeting can occur, right? You could target pollution source areas at the subfield level, the 25-acre sort of parcel. You can do it at the 400-acre farm level, the sub-watershed level, or at the entire, basin level. All of those could or should be probably incorporated into an effective targeting program. And we thought that something like this could actually improve the effectiveness, improve the water quality effectiveness of the program, and actually probably reduce costs as well. There's all sorts of issues with respect to fairness and data. When you talk about targeting, people don't want their data shared if they're a hotspot of phosphorus or nitrogen or sediment pollution. There's also issues when you think about cost share programs of targeting specific landowners or specific land managers. And that can be perceived as, targeting, I guess is the best word, but that can be perceived in terms of fairness as well. Kurt really already stated this, right? So the team accrediting basically averages those loads across relatively large scales. So, 5 to 20,000 acres. In those figures I showed in the previous slide, only the Susquehanna would be larger than 20,000 acres. All those other targeting examples were at much finer scales. And it averages the BMP effectiveness over that huge scale. So there's really no incentive for land managers or water quality managers to seek out and treat these high loading areas, even though it might be more cost effective and water quality effective. There's no differentiation of those areas or managers, at least at a relatively fine scale, in the accounting framework. So therefore, there's no real incentive to identify and treat those areas. I think this is a really telling slide. So nutrient loads also vary across land managers. There was an interesting study. This is in the Shenandoah Valley by Pearson McGuire a couple of years ago. They looked at the total phosphorus balance across 58 dairy farms up in the Shenandoah Valley. And that's what this table shows here, the quartiles and minimum maximum of the total phosphorus mass balance across those 58 farms. And what you can see here is that there's a huge, there's a huge range of phosphorus mass balances across these individual operators, right? These are all farms in the same, actually, I believe it was 2 counties. I think it was Rockingham and Augusta counties, but a relatively small area of the watershed can produce such huge range of total phosphorus mass balances. And so if we could begin to, seek out and target these, 25% or so of farms that are in that upper quartile of total phosphorus mass balance, well, then I think we could probably go a long way towards bringing that mass balance back in line. And there's been plenty of research that's shown, bringing the mass balance back into balance can dramatically improve, maybe not dramatically, can eventually improve water quality. And I've got another slide on that in a minute, sort of at a watershed scale. One other interesting thing from this study was they also looked at how the accumulation, how quickly the mass balance could change across these farms. And they found that on average, soil test phosphorus levels increased by about 1 milligram per kilogram for every 9 kilograms per hectare of phosphorus applied. And this was through poultry and dairy manure applications. Dairy manure applications, not poultry. So you see that the application of those manures above crop needs did increase the soil test phosphorus levels relatively significantly. 1 milligram per kilogram per year is relatively significant, at least as far as I'm concerned. Get rid of this again. Again, so, Kurt talked about this, but the TME accounting system really doesn't distinguish management actions across, individual farms or individual land managers. So there's opportunity, I think, there to target, these individual actors or farms that have a disproportionate effect on water quality. And again, there's not really any incentive in the accounting system for water quality or land managers to target and work with those areas. They're not going to get additional credit for working with a farm that has an order of magnitude higher phosphorus mass balance than they would with that farm that has a negative mass balance. And again, I probably should have put this slide before the farm slide, but this just shows the mass balance issue at the watershed scale. So, these large mass balance issues exist throughout the watershed, largely in agriculturally dominated regions, and largely in areas that have continued intensive animal agricultural growth. So the Shenandoah Valley, southeastern Pennsylvania, parts of the Delmarva are all have relatively high or relatively large mass imbalances. The difference between crop uptake and export in products and inputs, they have large mass imbalances. And if you squint, for the most part, you can see that these areas with those large phosphorus mass imbalances also tend to have those highest average phosphorus yields at the USGS or at the gauging stations in areas draining these watersheds. And so a question for, the Bay program that we sort of distilled in Caesar was, or a couple questions were, have we adequately characterized the extent and the size of these mass balances, both regionally and at a finer scale as well? And are the loads from these areas with these large manure stores adequately reflected in our estimates of the nutrient delivery in the system? And then finally, what's the distribution of manure application, and are the outcomes of this behavior reflected in our understanding of the system? So do we understand how people are dealing with things like manure and fertilizer? Manure for certainly probably a bigger issue. Do we understand what people are doing with that manure on the landscape? And then this I thought was an interesting illustration. And this is in one of the showcase watersheds, so Smith Creek, Virginia, up in the Shenandoah Valley. And actually, this is a picture from one of the sites that Kurt and I work in extensively on Smith Creek. It's a headwater spring of Smith Creek. And you see here a nice riparian area or riparian buffer, but you also see right here, huge piles of manure, heavily trafficked loafing areas, feedlots, whatever you want to call them, intensive animal agriculture. There's a poultry house up here. So this system is just loaded with nutrients. And so this is some work by Jimmy Weber at USGS. He saw that over the past 3 decades, there's been a 4-fold increase in the number of BNPs installed in this watershed, right? So riparian buffers, cover crops, you name it, they've all sort of been done up there. So a 4-fold increase in BNPs installed in the watershed. But they've also seen that concurrently that there's also been an increase in the number of animal units, right? So you've got more BNPs, but you also have significantly more animal units. And what they ultimately found was that the monitored, so the measured total nitrogen loads leaving the Smith Creek watershed have actually increased over time. So we've sort of got that, the conundrum, right? We've got way more BNPs installed in this watershed. We've also got more animals. So we've got a bigger mass imbalance, perhaps, if we want to call it that. And the result is increasing loads over time. And so I think, so I have 2 more slides here. So this is a question to nutrient use behavior, right? With respect to manure applications. These past couple of slides talked about how, the mass imbalance and how people are assumed to use manure. So we ask, can crediting to account for behavior improve outcomes? Is there anything we can do in the accounting framework to incorporate maybe not individual producer behavior, but more of the range that you might expect across these various regions of the watershed to account for these different behaviors with respect to manure nutrients? I think we know that manure applications might be quite different in southeastern Pennsylvania, on the Delmarva, and then in the Shenandoah Valley. Can we account for that in the model? And then does this TMDL crediting create any obstacle for regional efforts to address these mass balance issues? I don't really have an answer for that, but I suspect we might have a nice discussion about that. And then finally, the other major question we asked as part of Caesar was about the effectiveness of BMPs. So again, Kurt and Joe both talked about how BMPs are sort of estimated in the model based on that expert panel number, right? The efficiency of that BMP. And it's usually a single number, usually across the watershed. Again, I'm speaking generally there. There are obviously caveats to that, cover crops being one of them, but there's lots of uncertainty regarding BMP effectiveness. And uncertainty really exists through this entire causal chain, right? So here's a conceptual model of the system and how BMPs affect nutrient reduction or nutrient loading in the model. And you have uncertainty across the entire cascade. So there's uncertainty, related to the non-point source inputs. There's uncertainty related to weather and stochastic conditions, site conditions, the installation design and maintenance of the BMPs, how the BMPs process the nutrients and sediments. There's uncertainty about the other hydrologic components of the cycle, so surface runoff, leaching, atmospheric deposition, sequestration, etc. And that all propagates as you move down this sort of causal chain. The uncertainty propagates and becomes greater and greater as we sort of reach our ultimate goal, though, there in reducing nutrient sediment loads to the bay. And so I think we need to do more in the program to recognize this uncertainty. I don't think, certainly we're not talking about uncertainty. Uncertainty is not a good reason not to do anything. I think we need to embrace the uncertainty, try to do more to characterize how that uncertainty might improve our understanding of the system, and then more effectively deal with uncertainty as we incorporate it into the accounting framework. Again, so this is just sort of the conclusion of that. So the accounting system assigns that single efficiency for all approved BMPs, and there's really no systematic attempt to characterize how that BMP might perform differently in different locations or under different conditions. And so we wanted to know is that, can the TMDL crediting create greater incentives to reduce uncertainty around BMP performance? And again, I think there's a lot of room there to incorporate this type of uncertainty quantification into the accounting framework. And I think this is now Kurt.
Yeah, I'll just a few more slides, and then we'll turn it over to Joe. But to pick up on the accounting issue, the TMDL and the CAST model calculates these efficiencies and on these land uses, and the managers report practice installation. And so there's a focus on, we got to count the practices, we got to count this. But in that whole process, there's little incentive for people to actually look at that uncertainty and say, is what we're doing on the landscape, or these practices, these changes actually contributing to improvements in water quality? So the question is, does a TMDL accounting system create too much attention to accounting practices rather than looking at desired income? Are we distracted by our accounting system in terms of asking this question? What are the uncertainties? Where are they? And are we getting our actual results rather than, give me the credit according to the model? Last couple of slides. The last one, and I think there was a question about this in the survey as well, that we're going to have to keep encouraging people to refine and innovate in terms of how nutrients are controlled and reduced on the landscape, increase nutrient use efficiency, increase the effectiveness of BNPs, and for the interest of getting reductions and reducing costs. And then the question is, next slide is, does our TMDL accounting credit, is there more that we can do in our credit and accounting system that it encourages adoption of innovative types of practices? There's an extensive review system through the expert panel process that comes with the recommendations to put into the CAST model. And this process could take, in several cases, years. And I know of several examples that are taking multiple years for the expert panels to come to some conclusion and then make a recommendation that's been placed in the model. So the question is just a straightforward question: can we conceive of different ways in our accounting and crediting system that would encourage and facilitate dissemination and development of new approaches to reducing nutrients? I think that's the last slide. Zach, I'm at the end?
That's the end.
All right. So Joe, if you want me to turn it back to you, want to take questions now? How do you want to work this?
Well, there have been a few questions in the chat that I think have all been answered. Thanks, Gary, for helping out with a couple of them. Yeah, if you want to take a second or two here while we're switching over to see if anybody has any clarifying questions, that's fine. Are there any questions out there about what Kurt and Zach have thrown out there? All right. Well, that's fine too. So the next step that we planned out here, we did this survey that we sent out to people, and I just want to upfront acknowledge that the survey is not incredibly scientific, and it's always hard to interpret survey results. But this is what we threw out here, and this is what we got back. And so we're going to walk through these, and we only got 33 responses, and I think there's 80 people on the line, so we didn't get all of you. So feel free to weigh in either way. We had 33 participants, 8 water quality GIT members. It kind of spanned a lot of different backgrounds, about a quarter state agencies, about a quarter federal agencies, about a quarter NGOs, and then kind of a mix of other participants. And all the results that we'll show here are for everybody unless it's kind of clearly shown. So that was who responded to the questions. And now we're going to just kind of walk through the results, and I'm going to pose some questions to you guys. And if you want to use the raise hand feature to kind of weigh in, please do so. So this is the first slide, and this is the same result that Kurt showed earlier, but I'm going to spend a second explaining kind of the format of the figure. So this is all the respondents where the dark green is kind of the strongly agree, light green is agree, gray is neutral, and then the pink and red or orange and red or whatever are disagree or strongly disagree. And the other figures will follow this. And this was for that the Chesapeake Bay program credits non-point source reduction strongly influences the way that these programs are implemented. And I think in most of these situations, the dark green is kind of what we've thrown out there, that kind of what we're seeing about this. And, you know, I'm welcome to hear comments from the dark green folks as well, but I also really want to hear from the reds as well. And so I'll actually just pause right here in case anybody wants to weigh in that's in that dark red area about why they think that our Bay program crediting actually is not influential. So I'll open it up to that, or we'll move on to the next one.
And if people are looking for the raise hand feature, you should go to reactions and you'll see it there.
Okay, well, we can move on to the next slide then. So it seems like pretty much everybody agrees that our framework matters, you know, a lot to the way these programs are influenced. So now, same format of figures, but moving on to different questions. And I've kind of shorthanded them there at the bottom, but going from left to right, I'll just start. So we had this question about BMP uncertainty, and like for any given BMP, how uncertain are the results of that BMP? And generally, nobody disagreed with that statement. A few people were neutral, but it seems like we're all pretty much on the same page that when we go put a BMP on the ground, we're not really sure what the outcome is. You know, we do our best with guidance, but we don't really know the outcome. Probably not a lot to focus on for discussion there. The next question was a question about, does our framework provide incentives to kind of address that uncertainty? You know, assurance of BMP performance. And there were a couple of disagrees here. So I'll open it up if there are reactions to this question about, you know, do we actually, as a part of the, you know, incentive structure, provide incentives to make sure that the BMPs are working well? Okay, well, I'm going to keep on marching through these.
We have
so
one.
the next
We have
one,
a couple raised hands actually, Joe.
Oh, okay, sorry, I can't see the raised hands.
Yeah, sorry. It looks like Ruth, you lowered your hand. But
I'll just quickly say that I think incentive wise for BMP performance, a lot of that is embedded within the regulatory framework for BMPs, for stormwater, etc. But not so much for anything that falls outside of that in terms of implementation.
great point, Ruth. And then we have one more raised hand from Lydia.
Hi, I was just wondering, like, what would be an example of an incentive? You know, who's the incentive for? And if you could provide some examples.
Of what a possible incentive might be?
Yeah, of what an incentive would be. You're saying, okay, the incentive, some people disagree that there's incentives for BMPs, but like what do those incentives actually look like? I guess I just don't understand the question to know what an incentive would actually be.
Yeah, so I think what we are imagining is, you know, we are pretty good at throwing money at checking the check boxes for a BMP and putting a management effort in the ground. But do we do anything after that happens? After you get the BMP implemented that says this BMP is working. We all agree there's uncertainty here. Do we give any incentive to go back and look at the BMP and say it worked well? And I think our view is that there's not really incentives for that currently. But we just wanted to check that. Do others agree with that there's not incentives to check?
And one more raised hand from Mohsin, and then I think we should move on or keep moving.
Hi. Yeah, the problem with the BMPs in what we find is slightly different. Is that we are dealing with a company TMDL. That means the TMDL is a definite set of numbers that we have to meet. And the point source area, we can do that because we have an engineered system. We have pretty much good control over it. So we can meet that on a year after year if we designed it well. The non-point source is a very different issue because, as you said, BMPs don't have a consistent efficiency. It varies from all kinds of circumstances. So that we are always in danger of violating the TMDL or the non-point source. Now, I don't know what the solution is. I mean, one, and there is always sometimes requirement for monitoring all of that, which doesn't do much good. It is preferable that if you someone for an EPA come up with the standard performance of BMPs, and as long as we put them in there, should be considered as satisfying the requirement, because we can't do any better. We can't guarantee that once we put the BMPs, it's going to work exactly that we should the way we want it to be. So that is the problems we have with the BMPs.
Yeah, thanks for that response. That's helpful. Just maybe to help provide some clarity to this question, I'm going to throw out something there that has struck me, a couple different things actually. So there have been ideas that have come up in the past in terms of management efforts. I'm thinking about bioreactors, but there's a couple of them that have not been incentivized under the current framework. And they do have these strong performance metrics where they could demonstrate these things, but there's not been a desire to go after them because of that. That's not been intriguing to that. And there's been some other situations as well. And so I think that was at least one of where some of my interest started coming at this. I think they're getting disconnected from the Zoom here. So give me just a second. Me though. Okay, great. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, we hear you, and I have not advanced the
Okay,
slide
great.
yet.
So I'm operating blind here, but I can see it on my computer, so I'm going to keep moving forward. I'm going to get to the last two of these. So pretty strong agreement also that a better understanding of land managers, where these high loads are coming from would help. And then a little bit less agreement, but still overall agreement that the TMDL framework limits our ability to innovate. So I'll just open it up to those two questions. And Jeremy, if you could go through the raised hands for me to see, are there opposing views to those points? Are folks that disagree with kind of those statements want to give an explanation for why you might disagree?
I see a raised hand from Gary.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add a comment, and I put the comment in the chat to the one that you skipped over about saying that there is agreement among the folks that responded to this voting about finer scale beyond cast would be helpful. But when the partnership was talking in 2021 and early 2022 about the scale that they wanted in the phase 7 cast to be released in a few years, the water quality GIT in particular was almost evenly divided between people who really wanted a finer scale and those who really did not want a finer scale. Just to let you know, we are developing at the NHD catchment scale, which is a finer scale, but we don't know how we're going to apply it because the management community is kind of evenly divided on this still, but we'll come back to it in 2025. Thanks.
Thanks, Gary.
And Bryant?
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, first, thank you to Joe and Kurt and Zach and for organizing the conversation. A couple things that I would throw in that are related. I want to kind of stay on topic to what's on the screen, but you know, the presentations certainly raised a lot of things that would be good to talk through, and I know we have some time ahead. But and it's really kind of responding to Gary what you were just saying about the scale or the finer scale, and I guess part of this is coming back to embracing that idea of uncertainty, right? You know, finer scale outputs and modeling with arguably some inputs to model being at a finer scale, but not all inputs. And what does going to a finer scale provide us? And I really do think that the idea of uncertainty, recognizing it, calling it out, understanding what it is, I think that is important for what we do. But I'm not an on the ground practitioner. You know, I'm in the management side, if you will. But some of the things that I do find that are sometimes arguably counterproductive is some of our structure and framework. And I'll pause there because I don't want to go too far down the path of the things that might be counterintuitive or counterproductive for moving forward in BMPs. But I do think the main point for this comment is just on scale, that uncertainty probably becomes even more important if we go to finer scale and finer resolutions.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Brian. I think those are really helpful comments. And I realize these questions can be interpreted in a variety of manners. And so I guess I would just frame it thinking about some of the slides that Zach showed. I think what was at the heart of our question was not so much imagining a cast tool that goes to a finer scale for everyone, but rather, does having decisions being made at that level grant you leeway to do things that are much more effective? I know those sound very, very similar, but they still seem different in my mind. Anyways, I hope that's helpful. Are there any other raised hands, Jeremy?
Bryant, is that a new one?
I couldn't tell if it was raised, or I couldn't tell if I raised it or lowered it just a moment ago.
I did lower it, so go ahead.
Okay, you were able to lower. Okay, then no, it's yeah. There's lots to talk about, but we can continue the conversation and keep moving forward.
Great, and just since I know you're flying blind here, Joe, I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide for you.
Okay.
So I'm on 5 of 7 now, comparing the
Okay,
watercolor
great.
GIT and the full pool.
Yeah, actually, can you go back one? There should be a slide where the last bar is circled.
All right, I'm there.
Yeah. So again, this was out of these questions, I think the one that had the least agreement, although still most of the respondents did agree. And the question was whether or not you think that our TMDL accounting approach is limiting our effectiveness. And most agree, a few neutral, a few disagree. And so again, we just want to throw this question out there. We think that it's limiting. We think that like the way that we're accounting for things is preventing us from doing things that could be effective, and want to give an open space for people to push back on that idea.
See, Doug Myers was first and then Jill.
Yeah, so I'll push back a little bit. I'm just observing, at least in Maryland, and I would imagine Pennsylvania and Virginia as well. If there's agricultural cost share spending out there, it's not really optimized to effective basins. And so I don't think it's the accounting framework that's the problem. It's just that our limited dollars are not being spent on the most effective BMPs, geography, things that are built into the model, we're not taking advantage of. And so I don't know if it's possible to do a model run where all the existing annual state budgets for the departments of agriculture are loaded into effective basins to see if we get much more of a load reduction. Has anybody done a model run like that, so that we can demonstrate for the states how they could improve progress without throwing the model out?
Thanks, Doug.
Jill was next, then Bryant.
Thank you. So just, I saved my completed survey, so I remembered how I voted. The full question was, our current TMDL accounting approach limits our ability to consider these factors: uncertainty, fine scale, land manager variation, innovation, BMP assurance, in order to improve non-point source program effectiveness. So I think it's important from a state perspective. We have statewide non-point source programs, non-point source management programs. And while the Chesapeake Bay TMDL serves as a primary part of our programs, it is not the only. So, I think there are other pieces to our state programs that allow for us to focus on what our state is supposed to be doing. I think there was a comment here about regulatory structures and frameworks, comments about other programs, other incentives, other fine scale, local TMDLs, local WIPs, agriculture, delisting strategies, those types of things. So I personally voted as neutral because I don't think that it's fully limiting. I think that there's opportunities to make it better, and to not be so just beholden to the TMDL accounting framework, but use it as in complementary means to get at what we need to do, right? What is the result that we're after? The result is water quality improvement, whether it's in the bay or within our watershed, our small stream segments, that kind of thing. So I don't think that it's fully limiting. I think that there's opportunities for it to be better and for the framework to be improved upon. But I think that there needs to be a lot more of a meshing and a merging of our statewide non-point source management programs and the Chesapeake Bay TMDL.
Thanks, Jill.
And Bryant, and then we should probably keep moving.
I agree 100% with what Jill just said. And I think some of the things that may be challenges to moving forward, and particularly targeting the highest loading areas, or the areas where you really maybe get the most bang for the buck. some of those, and Zach, I thought your charts earlier on showing the nitrogen load reductions that the multiple models agree with versus phosphorus, there's a disagreement in model projections. Yet nitrogen effectiveness was one of the key parameters in at least the infrastructure funds for kind of targeting and prioritizing where we could look at that. And I think there are other metrics maybe we should look at. We've been talking some about DO equivalency. I think that's it. But I also think the struggle between is it the institutional structure in place, our accounting system versus other issues in there. And one of the big things to me is not only where do we get potentially return on investment, but also where do we have the willingness of landowners to participate, right? I mean, in our state local TMDLs, and I've been out of that program for a couple of years now, but we often would target our implementation plan development for our local TMDLs where we know we had active stakeholders support and community buy-in. And we're more likely to have success trying to get folks to adopt and install BMPs. So there's so many variables in here to kind of flesh out and to work through and to unpack. But just a couple more thoughts.
Thanks, Brian. So I'm going to try to respond to a few of these and then open it up to Kurt maybe, and try to clarify about maybe what we're proposing. I don't think we're proposing like throwing out a model altogether at all in any sense of it. But rather, when we think about the Bay program institution partnership as like trying to pull people along, the CAS credit is really like a big tool that we have. It's there. It's it's a valuation thing, and that tool, I think, with what Zach showed, doesn't encourage some of the kind of fine scale things that we think are really, really important. And so I think our question is like, how do we get to the place where we are encouraging those things? So yeah, Kurt, I'll kick it to you. I don't know if you have any follow-ups on this as well, but.
I'll just be brief. I hear what everybody's saying, and the model could be used for lots of different purposes, and I think that the things that we're talking about now is what can we use to better incentivize and to direct implementation when you get down to the implementation level. And then the other thing that people like Doug and Brian are bringing up great points that this is one of, if you're looking at program effectiveness, there is not one string you're going to be able to pull. I don't think one string you're going to be able to pull and then all the dominoes fall. That system of rules is based on a lot of different interlinking programs. And, like if you're looking at getting people to adopt different, getting landowners participation, we might be limited also in the way we finance those or what we ask of people. So, there's a lot of other things we agree that we're just trying to start with this one piece and saying, if this is one domino in that chain that we need to work on.
Thanks. There's a couple of great comments in the chat as well. Just didn't want to not acknowledge those. Particularly, James, your comment about that if we go finer scale, but there's still that uncertainty that's not helpful. I completely get that. So can you take us to the next slide? I've got 3 more slides here to kind of show some of these results. So this next question was, do you changing crediting framework as a priority? And that was interesting. Everybody thought it's a priority. Handful, about a quarter, give or take, think it's a top priority. And I guess from my perspective, some of the issues that Zach and Kurt have raised about, really needing to go to these very specific places and find a way to make it work there. I feel like our framework needs to open a door to those. So I'm in the dark green category. So I'll stop there and I'll open it up to discussion for folks that think this, to give your views on this.
And Matt,
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. This is great discussion. And I guess just one thing I was thinking about, when you were asking for questions on this slide, I really like the discussion around uncertainty, because I think so some crediting, maybe adding some tools into our crediting framework where, and I think this has been done before, where we can credit, to allow for innovation, while, maybe we don't have the science yet to bear on the effectiveness of a particular new practice, maybe have some uncertainty credit or, built into that. So there's maybe a temporary crediting for new practices while the science is being brought to bear in some fashion. And, the expert panel processes, it does take a long time. So I think if we can, try to expedite the science on and maybe take, and I know there has been a harder look at that recently, reviewing the protocols, but maybe there's some opportunities there to further streamline. So I think the uncertainty is important, and maybe again thinking of some innovative crediting there to allow different practices to go in and provide some interim credit or something. And again, I think that's been done within the program, but maybe could be further explored.
Just a quick response. I think it's an interesting problem, because if you do ask a mental question, is who within who in the watershed is willing to pay a premium for something that they're certain that works better than others. It's a hard question to answer, because it's hard to find somebody. So I am going to pay for a greater assurance that something's working better. It's hard to find where that happens and where that incentive is right now.
Well, can I jump in?
Sure.
Ken Staver. I'm not sure where the raised hand part is, but sorry if I cut anybody else off. But well, I kind of disagree with that. I mean, in the buffer, the buffer programs, the riparian forest buffer, which is generally agreed upon to provide the most benefits, gets the highest incentive. Right? It's still not meeting implementation goals, but it does get the highest payment per acre, the most upfront incentives. In the cover crop program, somebody said the cover crop program was an exception, but it's a pay for performance program with the understanding that the science on the performance of the different versions of the practice have been worked out. So we're not asking the farmer to demonstrate that nitrate in groundwater on his farm is lower because he used this cover crop option. We're trying to have that worked out ahead, but it's definitely a higher payment for, the higher performing version. So I think there is pay for performance around and targeting too. I mean, we know that our areas next to streams are high load areas. So we target taking those out of production, right? The most draconian approach is to take that land out of production. So we're doing some targeting, we're doing some incentives. So I'm a little uncomfortable with the broadness of this painting of our situation, I guess. It seems like on N, it was working pretty good. On P, we're having some issues, but that might just be a technical problem in how we're crediting things, not, it just could be bad. We don't have the science where it should be in the CAST model. So, But I think the broad brush here is a little too broad, I guess, is my comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I feel that, you know, sorry if I've painted a picture that, that we have not acted with effectiveness in mind, because I think all of our programs do. I think all of our programs have really tried to hit at that. But what stands out to me is that uncertainty piece, that it's very difficult to predict how well something's going to work, a variety of, you know, of these things, without, you know, kind of going and looking at it. And so to me, like, this key issue is that it seems like we don't even give an incentive for people to care how well things work, even though we know that there's a lot of uncertainty there. Yeah, we put the ones that on average are at the top of the list and we pay the most for them and we do that stuff. But, you know, anyway, this is a comment. I think we kind of need to keep moving forward. I got 2 more slides I want to show. And then we have a few Mentimeter questions to kind of for polling this group today. So Jeremy, could you hit the next slide? So this is the summary of how people rank things. And, you know, there was a little bit of wonkiness in some of these results where a lot of people, about 5 or 10 people, had the same should be and current. So I don't know if that was anomalous or not, but generally CAST was viewed as what's kind of driving things. And if you looked at like what we currently do versus what we should be do, there was at least a contingency that thought CAST should be deprioritized and actual water quality improvement should be prioritized. But one thing I did want to draw attention to that struck me was this targeting bar, that we all agree that targeting should be important, and we also think that it is a major driver for what we're doing. But even what Zach showed about resolution, and that the Bay model kind of works at this kind of broad scale, whereas the actual loads are at this very, very fine scale. I think that what we have suggested about targeting is that, like, we need to get down to that really, really fine scale and know exactly where it is that's more efficient. And so I think my view is that we're not quite there yet, at least in the Bay incentive framework. And Jeremy, can you take the next slide, which is kind of on this topic as well? And that's the last slide. So then this is kind of the survey results on what CAST is and how it ranks relative to other tools. You know, on the left side, you know, about half people agree that there are alternatives to CAST that we could use. You know, some disagreement here as well. And then on the right hand, it shows kind of where people put CAST as a tool, and pretty good balance on both sides here. That, you know, a lot of people think it's the most accurate tool or a moderately accurate tool, one of the best we have. Some people think it's an inaccurate tool, and that there's better alternatives. And so, you know, we got 2 Mentimeter questions that I'm going to go ahead and get Jeremy to start, and then we can kind of open it to discussion. So the first question is, could changing our TMDL crediting evaluation help address some of the things that we've talked about today? You know, can making change to the way we set up our incentive structures for Bay crediting help us move forward? You know, is there a future where we can do that? And so if you haven't used Menti before, you basically go to this website and type in the code, and it should give you a chance to vote on these questions. Okay, so sorry, we're kind of rushing through these last slides, but anybody that wants to provide feedback on those last 2 things, please do. Jeremy, I don't know if you were able to go through the hands. I still don't see that.
Yeah, and if someone's already in the Menti can confirm, I think I set it to be self-paced, so they don't necessarily need to wait for me. So if you're in the Menti and are able to submit and move through both questions, just maybe a quick confirmation would be good. So there's just 2 questions. I'll keep the results hidden for now, as it looks like we've already got 15 for the first question. So it does seem to suggest it is self-paced for folks. So we have a lot more than 20 people on the webinar, so I'll let that number tick up. And if you didn't get in yet, you can still see at the top of the screen the menti.com and the code. Jackie also put it in the chat. Maybe I'll display the results once we get up to 30, if we can get past 30. All right, seems to be slowing down. I'll go ahead and, oh, there we go. All right, I'll display results. They can still come in. Joe, do you want me to stay on this slide for a little bit as results come in? Or move
Yeah,
on?
I was trying to think about how to open up conversation to this. So, you know, it's slanted to the left, a lot of maybes there in the middle, which, you know, devil's in the details. Certainly appreciate that. And I think a lot of the discussion has hinted at that. Yeah, so I think this is our starting place of kind of next steps. And that's like, you know, should reimagining the way we have crediting happening be a part of our, you know, next chapter and how we're imagining that. And obviously a lot of details there to come through. And I want to comment on something that Jill put in the chat that, you know, maybe it's not CAST. Maybe CAST isn't problematic. It's how we use it. And I definitely agree with that. You know, it's like, you know, the tool can be helpful and not necessarily also have to drive all our decision making, at least the way, you know, we've kind of described today. So, but I'll open it up to the folks that don't think we should think about TMDL crediting change and offer thoughts there. Are there any hands, Jeremy? Sorry.
Yeah, Matt Rowe has his hand up.
Thanks, Jackie.
Go ahead, Matt.
And I do think I did vote yes on this particular, so I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at our crediting and, you know, how we incentivize, but just another comment regarding what I think is an important area to focus on too is the social science, you know, and how do we, you know, maybe we've gotten to the limit, you know, of with our existing programs and strategies, we've gotten to the limit of, you know, moving whether it's the early adopters or, you know, we've gotten as far as we can with them, and we're sort of we've plateaued on, you know, the level of participation we need to really achieve the restoration goals. So, you know, I just think the social science and more boots on the ground and, you know, things like that to provide technical assistance and kind of, you know, help people is important as well. So I think that needs to be recognized.
Great, thanks, Matt. And I think William was next, then Lisa.
Yeah, thank you. I was a maybe on this, and I think it's complex, and obviously models can always be improved, and finding the true you know, amount that should be credited for reductions is important. But I also think about kind of the notion of the reductions being a moving target and how that trickles down to the implications to things like pay for performance contracts, right? So people are creating budgets and determining their credits that they're going to reduce with a pay for performance project that they're proposing based on the current models. And they're creating their pricing based on that. And so in 2 years or 3 years after a project is, you know, agreed to, accepted for a pay for performance contract, if the rules change, if all of a sudden the modeling is totally different, you know, we just need to think about how that affects that original contract. If all of a sudden you're not meeting your, you know, your stated nitrogen reduction because the way nitrogen is being calculated now changes, you know, should there be like grandfathering in for how, you know, the contract environment when you're originally sort of proposing your project. And the other thing I think about is former efforts that have been done in the watershed to address pollution, and do all of those then need to go back and be sort of remodeled to get an accurate reflection of how much, nitrogen, phosphorus reductions have already occurred, if all of a sudden the way that we're crediting things changes. So I'm really on the fence. I see the benefits of updating the models, but also it has a lot of trickle down implications to funding programs, grant recipients, and previous projects that have already been completed.
Thanks for that. Lisa, you were next, and then Joe.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think we need to recognize that there's some really important trade-offs to trying to incorporate a lot of fine scale science. I completely agree that when you're on a farm field and you're designing an implementation, you need to take all the fine scale stuff into account. But to try to work that into our incentive structure could end up discouraging participation if we make it too complex. And we have an example of that with there's a lot of issues with respect to this, but the Maryland nutrient crediting trading tool, I think, is an example where farmers perceived it as being unfair that farms that were very close to each other got very different credit amounts, and they, not really understanding why those calculations were so different, just made them kind of hate the program. And there were other reasons why trading didn't take off, but I think there really are very significant trade-offs to going super fine scale. So I think there's a potentially better way to incorporate the fine scale without trying to do it in a broad systematic way.
Thanks for those comments.
And there was one more hand raised there, Joe, or do you want to move on or ask Nick?
Well, yeah. So Nick, let me just go through the slide since we only got 5 minutes left, and then we'll go straight to you. But the second question is really intended to be asking about, looking forward. Should we be talking about this more? Should we be, trying to tweak the crediting framework to address these issues more than we are right now? Because frankly, I feel like this has come up in conversation a few times at the GIT and other places, and I feel like there's, a pretty good chart about what we're going to be doing for the next several years in terms of, model upgrades and stuff like that. And I don't think a lot of it has hit these important issues. So my viewpoint is that we're not doing this yet. We might be kind of tweaking a few things, but we haven't really started diving into addressing some of these issues. It looks like most agree more effort here is warranted. So those are my comments, and I'll go to Nick, and then we can open it up for other discussion in the last few minutes we have here.
Yeah, I'll keep it real brief. I really just wanted to add on the last comment there to say that the on the ground reality is that we do have so many farmers that are really interested in implementing best management practices and doing this, but completely to the point that was just made. Sometimes it's very frustrating that like MEB dollars or something else, for an example, it just draws that line and doesn't make that farmer eligible, even though we've got one over the line that is as good of a project, if not a better project for pollution reduction loads. But this arbitrary line has been drawn in the sand that says, no, this is the area that we're going to receive the most reductions from, which I understand. But at the same time, fine scaling this down will really have an impact on situations like that when we're already running into that exact situation as it is currently. So just wanted that thought, but thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Are there other hands, Jeremy?
No raised hands at the moment.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to try to wrap things up here and say that we're trying to get a conversation started today. And I think we did that. But obviously, moving forward to make something happen, there's a lot more conversations that need to have, and I think we want to have those. Like we want to, have conversations centered around what we could do that would be beneficial and move towards some of these things. But I really appreciate the dialogue today and the commentary, and I'm excited to keep working on this as a part of the Bay Partnership, Water Quality GIT, et cetera. And thank you for coming. Kurt, do you have any other kind of final comments you wanted to raise?
No.
Okay.
Well, Joe, and I'll just
Jeremy?
end by saying, and I'll just wrap us up by saying all the slides today, we'll wrap those up and post them on the Bay Program calendar entry. Probably won't happen today, but it will happen. And then we will likely send out I want to send a basic feedback survey out just to get feedback on today and how it went, since this is our first time trying this different format. So you'll get that via email, and then this has been recorded and it will live somewhere. I'm still confirming where that will be, whether it's like a CRC YouTube or maybe just ChesapeakeBay.net. I'm TBD. So you will be, we'll make sure people are aware when it's up. And thank you everyone for joining today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.